Um, yeah, I guess what didn't put me on the path, I think might be the better question. It seemed like all roads were leading in this direction. Um, where to even start there? I don't. Gosh, yeah, maybe it's better just to leave it at that. I just felt like every aspect of my life was pointing me towards, this point.
Hmm. Hmm. And leading up to chiropractic school, were you like taking the prerequisites, or did you already have like a different path that you were on that you kind of completely shifted in this direction? I'm just curious, like, what was like kind of like the time leading up to school like for you? What were you spending your time on? How are you preparing yourself mentally, physically, spiritually for this?
Hmm. Wow. I like that you included all of those elements because I think that each one of those were a part of, what I mentioned earlier as far as, them all roads pointing. And I think, um, yeah, I guess all right. I guess, what was the question one more time?
Just like, what was it that pulled you down this path? What did you see in your mind was possible by going to school to become a chiropractor, and like what yeah, just like what was it that got you to be where you're at today, I guess we could say.
Right. Um, Certainly there was, like the dark night, and um, I guess the reemergence, like, oh wow, I'm still intact. Something is still intact, and where do we go next, kind of thing. And um, my undergrad background was in art, like sculpture, printmaking, um, and that just feels like a whole other lifetime. And then after this, dark night was, I got involved with like massage therapy. I had tried a few different sort of, I guess, pursuits, in regard to like, what is like right livelihood? What is a way to exchange, my energy for, um, you know, sustenance, and what I guess is often referred to as like right livelihood. Um, and so I think some kind of path with purpose, I think ultimately is what was coming up. And not that art wasn't, it was in that time, but or like you had mentioned, things shifted gears. Um, yeah, certainly trying many different things, but there's the spiritual pursuit, right? That sort of aspect of my life. And then there was what seemed to be like that right livelihood kind of career pursuit, which was like another aspect that I was looking at. And like one thing in particular, I found myself at a John DeMartini workshop a couple of times, and then started to notice that I was the only one in the room that wasn't a chiropractor. Like that was definitely, it wasn't like an aha moment. It didn't like, for some reason it didn't hit me over the head like, oh, this, what do you do? Oh wow, this is my path. This is what I need to be doing, right? Like, but later, like 2020 hindsight, it definitely felt like um, that was preparing me in a way for going down this path. Just one of many things, I guess.
Mhm. Just in the short time of us having this conversation, I really pick up on more of a spiritual dominant tone in maybe your life of as far as like people having more of a physical, a mental, or a spiritual uh, path that they walk as like the dominant path or like their compass, their inner compass. And it seems like you're really connected to your spiritual path. Can you kind of elaborate on like where that started or the root of your spirituality, like what inspires that, or
Hmm.
not inspires that, but just what are your guiding principles or your values that you carry with you?
That's interesting. Yeah. I was told by like relatives, aunts, uncles that they thought I was going to be like a minister or a pastor or something like that when I was a young kid. Like they just saw me as I don't maybe they asked me to pray or something before a meal or something and it became apparent to the family that like they thought that's where I was headed, like, "Oh, this guy's gonna go into ministry," because that was the culture, I guess, of the family, Um, like community church and kind of that fundamentalist, Christian sort of upbringing. Um, but, definitely came from a family of, I would say, like, individuals, people that, um wanted to be themselves or express themselves and certainly rebelled pretty hard against that in my teenage years and got exposed to Vedanta and looking at Eastern things pretty early and um, picking up those practices kind of early too. But ultimately, the Dark Knight was ahead of me, I guess, at that point, and it was, I guess, a unavoidable um, aspect of my, I guess, evolution that I had to go through, and was pretty grueling. Was kind of drawn out. It wasn't a quick night. It was a long night, um, and the fact that I came out the other side is certainly a miracle, or what appears to be a miracle. Um, and I think all of that, I guess, feeds into this idea of like having purpose. You know, like Carlos Castaneda would say about in reference to you know Don Juan was all paths are the same, just find the one that's got heart, find the one with meaning for you. That's the most important thing. And I feel like that's kind of been the beacon or the thing that has kind of like drawn me down this path ultimately.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned Carlos Castaneda. You talked about Vedanta, or you mentioned Vedanta. Can you unpack maybe this way of life, this way of thinking, this way of being that those resources have helped maybe clarify for you, and maybe how that has trickled into the student experience at chiropractic school?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was getting into as far as enrolling in chiropractic school. That was quite a surprise. Just what little exposure I've had to your podcast and what you're up to, I think it's much needed in the community to help prepare people for what they're getting into, because it was a real kind of slap in the face for me. And without my family or any of that sort of foundational, um, I guess you might call it training of life, coming up to that point, I wouldn't have made it this far in the program. And I'm certainly no all-star, within the program. Like, I fell out of my cohort and fell off pace pretty early on, and it's going to take me a few extra uh, quarters to complete the program. Certainly, not having a science background didn't help matters. Like, all of my extracurricular sort of academics were like in psychology in an art school, right? So it's like totally other side of the brain. So, um, but yeah, having those pieces of, for me, anyways, um, I guess just kept the possibility of me completing this, um, as I encountered all of those, I don't know, hurdles, but definitely friends have shared the term gauntlet, and at first I thought that was like some kind of circus term where you have to like do all these different maneuvers to like get through a course. But when I actually looked it up, it's like, no, somebody's challenging you almost to a duo. They're almost like getting in your face and being like, "What do you got? Let me see it." Like, because if you don't show it, you ain't getting past. You can't come past here. And like multiple times you're like engaged in a gauntlet with somebody that's some kind of, um, I wouldn't say self-proclaimed gatekeeper, but it kind of almost feels like that, because there's really no rhyme or reason as to why some people present so challenging in the way that they, I guess, guard that gate compared to other people who are more sort of like family, or they're trying to engender something in you that, like, I feel like a good teacher might do, like, you've got this in you, let me help stoke it. Where other people, it just feels like they're expressing some uh undeveloped or um arrested development almost, where they're like got some inferiority complex or something, and they're like working that stuff out on the students as they like move through or attempt to move through the program. And certainly being a little bit older, um, it felt like there was kind of like a blanket of everybody's a 20-ish something person that's still under mommy and daddy's, care, and hasn't really seen the world, and I'm going to show them what's out here, like I'm going to wake them up. And so to get kind of lumped in with that was a little bit off-putting, but certainly having life experience and some of these foundational spiritual underpinnings made it more easy to see, what was actually happening, and create some perspective so that I could keep moving through it, um, and just keeping that, that end game sort of in mind. Like, oh, I want to help people somehow at some point, and this might enable me to do that more readily, or more get me out there in a way that I can do that for more people.
Hmm. And what have you really been attracted to? What types of tribes have really resonated with um, what you've come to realize this path is about, or what you've come to kind of devote yourself to in regards to the study of becoming a chiropractor.
Yeah, so I guess in the massage community, I got involved with the work of John Barnes towards the end and myofascial release, and really resonate with him and his work. And um, in a way, I felt like I was trying to take structural integration, or like what Ida Rolf's work was turning into, um, and blend it with Upledger and Michael Shea and the biodynamic craniosacral. And then when I met John Barnes and his work, I was like, oh, this guy has already done it. I don't have to invent the wheel. This guy's got it right here. I started studying with him, and I was under the care of a naturopath, and she mentioned how I needed to get checked by a chiropractor in order for her to use this device that was required my system to be open. And I was like, oh, shoot, it's been a while since I got adjusted. I need to go do that. And then she was like, oh, I really want to get you uh, into this guy's office, but he's booked for months. He's been away for years. He just came back. And that, of course, piqued my interest. And I'm like, whoa, what is he doing? And this lady's pretty smart. I think she was trying to kind of coax me into, like, she saw like there was a void in my life in a certain way, and she was trying to coax me, and it worked. But she was like, "Oh yeah, he's combining like MFR with chiropractic." And that's like almost like a no-no in the world of MFR. Like they really like there's no chiropractors in the MFR world. They're like either you do one or the other, like so the fact that, but she was definitely a lone wolf and thought outside the box. So the fact that she saw this as being such was, just kind of, I think, her nature too. Um, and of course, birds of a feather flock together. So I was intrigued by that idea, and started to think about putting them together. When I started my way out to school, I drove out from Pennsylvania. I stopped in an area of Arizona that I'd been living in a few years prior, and ended up dining alone across the table from another person that was dining alone. And she ended up being a network practitioner. And this was the second time I'd heard about network. And I was like, there might be something to this. The universe is kind of like throwing me a bone here, like, check this out. And so I got involved with that community, or that approach, early on at school, and did that for like the first 2 years of school. Um, and that went really well. I got under care and did that. Studied it, went to the seminars, took the elective, did all that, and then COVID happened, right? And that was a wake up on so many levels, and such a blessing on so many levels too. It's kind of crazy to think of it that way, but without that, I wouldn't have the deeper understanding of many aspects of this profession that I have now. And I felt a little bit of a rift happening between me and network, um, kind of early on in COVID, and it was kind of interpersonal stuff, and it was also my own stuff that was coming up while receiving care, that I felt like it was opening me up in a way that I needed somebody else. Like I needed a head shrinker or somebody to come in and work on what was between my ears, as a result of what was being like released in my nervous system. And that was pretty wild, and it got me to kind of pause the work that I was receiving. And and I started getting osseous care again. Um, um, Eric Rubin was, I guess, somebody that I would see pretty regular around that time. And but even then, it was like, but I felt kind of like out to sea a little bit without a rafter. Like I didn't know where I was going at that point. And took an MLS with Wade Port and was totally rocked by him and that whole and then found out that Arnaud, his family practice was actually in my hometown growing up, and we never went there. To totally missed that opportunity. I don't know how the family missed that because we were going to like a family practice in the next town over. So it's kind of wild how some of this goes. But was thinking like, yeah, I might do get more into that, and was like after having spent so much time with network, was like, wow, I am like, can I do this? Like this osseous piece is like I I felt like there was some kind of progression, maybe a little bit from MFR into network, but I couldn't really piece it together. And with MLS, it felt a little bit stronger, but my skill set was just awful, right? Because I had spent the first 2 years doing all these light contacts, and refining all of those, the aspects of that care. And so getting down into the, more osseous, high velocity, low amplitude stuff was like, okay, here you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks again. Like, and I'm like, I don't know if I can pull this, I don't know if this is for me or not. Um, and then I finally found my way into John Martinez Numa seminar, and then it just, I think just seeing him, I mean, the guy's, he's a legend, right? He's mysterious. And first quarter, like one of my best, you know, classmates was in school because of him. Like he came into the juice shop or something that she used to work at in Denver, and now she's pursuing chiropractic, like, but she had mentioned him early on, so I'd heard about him, but because of where I was, the path I was going down, it just didn't happen for me because I wasn't looking at osseous stuff. I was like, yeah, I want to get that piece at some point, but I'm going to focus on this network piece because it's so powerful and profound. But then once I started kind of like losing my mind a little bit from it, I was like, okay, I don't know that this is right. Like something's off here. I gotta come back and relook at everything. And that first adjustment from John Martinez just rocked me. And it was like, and when it was done, like I felt good and I didn't need to go see a head shrinker. And I was like, this is okay. That's more like what I remember about like chiropractic, like growing up and experiencing, the deeper osseous um, adjustments. Like I don't ever remember having to work something out with somebody else somewhere else because of an adjustment. But that's what was happening with network. And I had bought the package with network. And so I continued to finish, those experiences and practicums as they call them these days. And I know there's been a lot of changes in, you know, anyways. So as I went to finish out those classes, COVID was still happening. It was like full on at that point, and one of the docs tested positive after like a hands-on what they call practicum, and it was emailed out to everybody, all the attendees. FYI, somebody tested positive. Um, and through my research at that point, I was just like, really, like people are chiropractors, because like the more I delved into what was actually going on, it seemed to me like you had to be living on another planet almost to be a chiropractor and to think that this thing was like legitimate. But again, early on, hey, I was right there with people. So this was just my experience at this point, like, okay, I get it. You took a test somewhere and they said you got something and you have symptoms or whatever. And then they care for people. They're sending out this info, just so you know, this happened. And then 2 days, so like 3 weeks later, was the next experience. And 2 days prior to that experience, they sent out another email to all the people that had been at that practicum that were heading to the experience. And they said, you need to furnish a negative PCR in order to get into the experience. And if you hadn't been at that practicum, you didn't get that email, right? So it was just because. And so at that point, I was like thinking about not even going. But here, my hotel was booked. If they had given me some notice, I would have totally cut the thing off and not even went. But because they had done it 2 days prior, yeah, I was kind of SOL. So I bit the bullet, and I don't know if I incriminate myself here or not, but I photoshopped a PCR in order to get into the seminar. And before that, like when we got the email, I called them and gave them an earful and was, pretty emotional about it. And just, I think the irony of excuse me, I think the irony of, like not only just a chiropractor, like doing the homework to follow up on everybody to make sure that, you know, just those people from that, that had that contact, um, making sure that they were the ones that had to do like so right there you can see they're totally buying into the whole narrative that's being projected onto everybody. And then the fact that they were going to hold you to it, like either you furnish this thing or you don't these papers technically, right? If we want to. And then I'm thinking to myself, and this is a Jewish led organization, these folks are Jewish and they're asking me for my papers. They want my papers. Like, do they not see the irony in this? Like, it made me want to puke, like I felt really sick about it. And then when we got there, it was all hellfire and brimstone. Dee Dee, BJ, and Donnie are the only chiropractors that ever existed, And the hypocrisy just made me like, I couldn't, like, people were going up and asking questions, but it's so kumbaya at these things. Like, if you aren't drinking the Kool-Aid, you're really like, you're almost invisible at there. And so, there's a lot of writhing and wreathing, from the Kundalini or whatever that Donnie is like shooting out to people. And if you're not writhing with everybody else, you almost don't exist. You're really kind of invisible. No skeptics allowed, that's for sure, and but meanwhile, all of that other stuff leading up, so that was just like the icing on the cake for me with network. Um, and I had
Just at a fundamental level, though, you see the value and utility in network not only through your own experiences, but also just for the work that it is that it represents. Can you kind of just maybe introduce a prospective student to what network spinal is?
mm, that's a good question. I don't know what it is. Yeah, what is it? I mean, it's like they say like bound energy, they find these places in a way, like to use John's language, John Martinez, they're finding places of rapport, but it's also in a way very recipe book. You if you find this parameter, short leg stays short, a lot of it comes from Thompson or similar parameter usage. If you find this, then you do that. And if you do that, you do it this way. And if after you do that, you recheck and you find this, now you do this, and it's like, it's very recipe oriented, it's like you follow a recipe, but they're very light contacts. And the contacts, as opposed to being in a place of subluxation, they're often more what Donnie would refer to as like bound energy. And so you're bringing awareness to that excess or bound energy in the body so it can be dispersed and utilized. And they're very aware of different waves in the body, right? Respiratory wave, um, somatopsycho wave. Like there are different levels of care where these things start to come on, and they're like indicators as to what part of the recipe you then cook up, sort of.
And then just as a transition, can you introduce people to John's work of Numa? Like, how do you see that work? Can you unpack that for people?
uh, hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I'm noticing about a lot of great chiropractors is that they're innovators and they're also like investigators, researchers, artists, right? All of these different terms come to mind because they spend a lot of time looking at what came before them. And and that can be like in the realm of neurology with like the work of Alf Bragg and mechanical cord tension. Um, or it can be like through the work of other chiropractors that you know teach primarily massage therapists. Like John really studied and utilizes a lot of the work from Randolph Stone, and he was a chiropractor and an osteopath, but I learned about him in massage school. Polarity therapy is something they teach massage therapists, and um, obviously it's not just limited to them, but and that work is super deep because I mean the man was brilliant and just full of so much heart, and but also went down the Vedic path as well, and like really studied in depth, and Vedanta and Ayurveda and that lineage of looking at the world, and then incorporated that back into the body, or the potential for the body to heal itself. And how do you bring about peace through these opposite ends of a system that, ultimately it's a world of dualities, and that is present in the body too. And so like how do contacts on these opposite ends of, what might be called a positive or a negative, um, how does that facilitate healing, and how can that be utilized to help bring somebody back, or open them up into a place of more ease? Um, but that's just one thing that John utilizes, and I think the most interesting thing for me about John's work is that it seemed like a natural progression of John Barnes' work and MFR. When I experience John Martinez's adjustment, I don't even know what happens. Like it's such a whirlwind. Like I come out the other side and I'm like, what in the world just happened? I have no idea, right? But when I watch him engage somebody else and check them and take them through the adjustment, it reminds me of John Barnes and the way that the system he talks about following rapport. And ultimately, from my point of view, when I watch what that looks like, it looks like the unraveling. It looks like a system unwinding. So like Upledger, MFR, structural integration, that whole sort of angle on that those things deal with different layers of the human system. And then obviously John is taking it now into the osseous level. So if for me it was like, whoa, this is a natural progression of all of that other stuff that I've spent time with, but now it's like going into the osseous. So it's like, let's finish this thing off because there's one more piece here and it's in the bone, right? Or what appears to be, um, the bone, or Barnes says like bone is just fascia with like some extra calcium in it. It's like it's all the same stuff. It's an information highway, and that information is transmitted by light. And so how do we open up these highways so that light can move more freely,
Mm, mm. Yeah. I must.
Yeah, how do you how do you describe what I have a guest here at my apartment. They're coming back in. So I don't know if you have to edit this out or whatever that looks like, but um uh yeah, how do you describe John's work? And I know that it keeps evolving, like all of these artists, these masters. They they're so dedicated, and the earnestness of their path and their heart is profound. And it's there's no for me there was just such a the more I spend time with him, there's just such a like I feel like there's no separation from him, his work, his life. It's all like this one continuous sort of and that is such an inspiration, like that amount of like continuity in it's just yeah, it's inspiring.
Yeah, can you kind of touch on some of the things that you get exposed to when you go to a Numa seminar? How many have you gone to? I know that he has this whole structured progression of experiences and workshops that he invites people to come. I know there's like an Artifacts 1.5. I don't know if
Mm.
you can break down like some of the different exposures that or themes of topics that he explores throughout this program that he's created.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I went to that first seminar. I guess it was September of last year, and and that was in the Bay, and it was in the middle of the thing, and he drove out, which was pretty cool. I think his family came with him too. Certainly there was a lot of people that it was a happening scene. Like people came from because people had been locked up or whatever for a year and a half or something, and they hadn't seen one another. Um, so that was the first one that I went to, and then from that point on, everyone that I like went on tour, like everyone that happened after that, wherever it was, I was there, and it has been that way up until just this last one was in Texas, and I missed that one. That was the first one I had missed since then, and they were happening pretty much every month. I think there was a little bit of a break around New Year's. Um, uh, so I definitely I guess I've been to all of them and some of them a couple times, and so I'm making my second circumambulation here through the series. Um, So the first two are what are called roots, what he calls roots, and there's like two parts to it. And a lot of that is your more sort of, traditional what would be, like your side posture, your supine cervical, and that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of it has to do with like um, how do you organize your system before you put a force in to somebody else? So a lot of it is this, bowspring kind of um, engaging of coils. So there's like two primary coils, and they cross at the heart. You have your spine, and then there's a secondary coil that's kind of across the chest, and then your heart is like that access point. Um, so those are like the fundamentals, and then as you go 1.5, I guess technically would be what's after that, and John calls that like the glue that holds his work together, and that um is kind of a more philosophical, I feel like, seminar. Like there's less hands-on with that. And most of his, especially roots, there's like a ton of hands-on. Yeah, yeah, we definitely sit around and talk, and John is a master at describing, from my perspective, he's a master at describing the principles of chiropractic. And that's, of course, one of the things that has drawn me into studying with him. Um, but as you get into like 1.5, I feel like there's more time spent around these principles, and he gets into zones, which is Thurman Fleet's work, and how that is utilized with every adjustment, and how to refine that. And then there's even some more esoteric pieces there too, like just like the Kabbalion or something, like where like these hermetic teachings that are like pre-biblical or maybe even pre-Vedic, and like this potentially is like where a lot of the more universal truths stem from. Like they're so distilled in the Kabbalion, like, and those that stuff like that is talked about. And then from there is master tones is two, and that's where you're getting into like the thoracic aspects and opening up the thoracic and its effect on the distal ends, which I guess ultimately, like with Randolph Stone, you find that it's affecting coccyx and sphenoid, which is interesting because those are so, like, how do you contact those? You really, how do you get a handle on them? Or when I ask John a question like that, he's like, "How do you not?" You know, it's like if you're affecting the system, those pieces are going to be affected, and that's kind of what master tones I feel like gets into. Like when you're working with the thoracic aspect, you're going to affect the distal ends. And there's some occiput there too. I think we get into occiput lift in the master tones. And then three is like that was way over my head. It was like I've only yeah. I'm about to go and study two again next weekend, and I've only taken three once, and it was like just like way over my head. But if I if I remember right, it was kind of like seated cervicals, which were something that he does that I've never experienced from anybody else, which is these sort of like lateral, anterolateral kind of lift moves in the cervical. And that's been a real game changer for me with whiplash, self-inflicted. I mean, I was into like punk rock, heavy metal kind of music as a kid, well, I say kid, but like most of my young adult life, and I did a lot of headbanging, and I didn't realize it, but I was like inflicting uh, whiplash on myself, and then I actually got rear-ended, and that just like really messed me up. So receiving this type of adjustment, I think, has been I'd never experienced it before, and it really has shifted my whole system. And so I feel like that's what three is about, and I'm still like trying to grapple with that, you know.
Hmm.
And then he did a four for the first time in Mexico over Christmas last year, and that was a lot of different occiput. I ended up with a pretty wicked Montezuma's Revenge, and I missed the second day of the seminar because I was in bed and on the throne all day. So I only heard about what the second day was about, basically. But I know that there was like some cranial sort of, I think it's inspired from Randolph Stone, sort of like these cranial sort of contacts that can be used to develop rapport and connect with what he would call like a long line into the system from the top of from the top down. Kind of on par with cranial sacral, but maybe more in line with Randolph Stone. Um, and then a bunch of different occiput moves, like kind of Virgil Crane inspired stuff. I don't have much exposure with that, but just from hearing what other people were talking about, um, yeah, more like prone or supine occiput moves. And then there was another one. Oh yeah, like what he called like y-axis sort of like compression. Again, like a primer, like how to kind of like bring compression into the system to help it kind of do the opposite. So like, like how do you open a stuck door? Sometimes you got to push it closed a little bit more in order for it to unhinge, you know? So there was that piece also.
What are the intentions that you enter into these experiences with at this stage? You're in the last year of school. Like, how are you approaching these investments in your time, your energy? Like, do you reflect on them through journal
Mm.
entries after the seminar? Like, what's your personal process of like how you try and really squeeze as much juice out of these really deep experiences?
Right. I know. That's a great question. Um, I definitely am more like a kinesthetic. I grew up on a tree farm, landscaping, this kind of stuff. So like I'm very like a hands-on kind of learner. Um, so I'm also more like I guess like a right-brained or like abstract kind of thinker, or I'm not too logical in the way that I learn things, and I try and just and I think that's the other piece that has drawn me to wanna study with John is, like, I feel like I learn the way that he teaches, and it's very open, and it is very kind of abstract, and I know that some people find it to be, like, too nebulous and, like, it doesn't resonate with them, like, they come out of those things and they feel like they need to go ground for the next, like, 3 days, you know what I mean? To, like, come back into their system because 'cause they're, like, out here spinning around, you know? But for me, somehow it clicks. I think, and maybe that would be my encouragement for a young prospective student is to just stay open and find the teacher that you resonate with. Find the one that teaches the way you learn. And I think that's my big takeaway from the experience that I've had so far. It's like, wow, when you find somebody that teaches the way that you learn and you click with them, I think that'll take you so much further, so much faster than for me, like analytically, because that's not how I operate, like trying to figure out like how do I get the most juice out of this? Well, I don't know. I get into the experience and it happens. And I'm just like, wow, that was like, I got so much out of that. Like, I felt like I evolved so much where I've gone to other things and I'm like, and I'm racking my brain trying to get something out of it. And I come away feeling like, did I get anything? I don't know. I can't tell, you know? So, yeah, I think just staying open, just staying open and like, John would say, or John's teacher would say, like, trust life, trust, be yourself and trust life. Those are like two big signs in John's office that I love. They're just very simple, but like so on point reminders, just be yourself and trust life. Like, wow, thank you for keeping it simple because I like to complicate things.
What's crystallizing as your image for what might transpire after you leave the confines of the school experience and enter into the more free um, path of being a chiropractor in practice or in the world? What does that look like to you in your mind or in your heart these days?
Mm, yeah. Hmm. I'm definitely ruminating over that. Of course, as time gets closer to the end here, it's like, and again, I think it still comes back to that same piece, just like trusting that whatever life is, it has gotten this this vehicle this far, this experience this far, and to just keep doing that. And something else that comes up a lot around John and his work is like just getting out of the way and letting innate, as we like to call it, do its thing, and like just constantly coming back to that place of like stepping out of the way and just, allowing life to live, allow it to live through me, as it lives through, a fine example like my dog. My dog is reminding me like that life is just living through him. He's not getting in between it, ever. And so that's a good reminder. And I feel like that's I have so many ideas about what it could look like or what it might look like or how I would love it to look or, feel or and all of those things. But more and more it's I think just coming back to that place of just like trusting it that it's gotten this far, it's going to keep going. And I really enjoy studying the foundational stuff that John shares. His work comes out. Like I feel like he's very transparent too. He's not trying to put up a facade of mystique. He's very open with like what he's studying and where he's been with his studies. and I love that. Network was the opposite of that. Network was very like, well, you got to pay this extra 5 grand, and then we'll tell you, you know, a little bit more about what Donnie was studying.
Mhm.
And that was, that was a little bit of a, oh, okay. Well, I don't have 5 grand.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
but with yeah, I guess peeling into those foundational things, the more I go into those, the more rich this work becomes, and I see how it's enlivened, other people, and it might not actually technically be like chiropractic teachings, but yet they're operating from the same universal truths. And so I love those too because they're applicable to everybody in a way that everybody can kind of um, tap into if they choose. Where sometimes it feels like the chiropractic text is, there's a lot of prerequisite of understanding terms and what these things mean before you can kind of even just peel back like a single layer on them. So, you know, I don't know. Did that answer? Was I almost forget what the question was.
No, it's all good. No, I appreciate you just embodying like who you are, what you're about, what your studies have been, and where you're going is kind of just evident in just like how you talk about just following your own, like getting out of the way and just following your own innate. I'm just yeah, I'm just trying to tease out the layers of kind of like who you're becoming, who you are, and allow people to just take it for that, but also allow people to see themselves in your experience and see themselves um, just like becoming more open maybe through these kinds of conversations to the possibilities, the potentiality. It's hard to put words sometimes to the experience. You just can't really put words to it, but you're doing your best, so I appreciate it. I know it's not, I'm like asking you to really describe the undescribable in many
Mm,
ways. So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
and often that's been something that I encountered recently, is that that's almost like idolatry in a way. It's like we're like trying to prop this thing up that can't have a description, and it's like we might we might actually fall into the trap of idolatry if we cling to these words too strongly. Like words fail us. They're clumsy in the description of this kind of stuff.
hmm, yeah, I'm just curious if you have any reflections or questions back to me, if there's anything that I could do to make this time a little bit more I don't know, interesting for you or more like I don't know if you want to carry this conversation that we've been having into anything that turns into questions that you might be framing um, that you want to ask me or that you just want to share that could be guiding questions for somebody or that could be helpful to anybody who's been listening up until this point and is curious like where do we go from what you've been describing or where are you at right now at at this time in the conversation, like do you have questions or thoughts or curiosities?
Hmm, interesting. Hmm. um I mean, immediately I wanted to go to like the current situation, like what's going on for me right now in this uh, current step in the journey. And at the same time, I also wanted to consider, questions for you because we've only messaged a little bit, but we have some acquaintances that are some of the most interesting people in my life right now. So, um, so there's, I guess I'm at a fork in the road here. um, I think I would be remiss if I didn't speak a little bit about the struggles of late in chiropractic school because I think it's very relevant and it could be useful for students that are thinking of going down this path. Um, so maybe I can start there if that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, just try and keep it to like under 4 minutes if possible.
Okay. Uh, let's see. So I think what in part what has drawn me to chiropractic it was the philosophy, and yet I had no idea about the philosophy, and the exposure I was getting to it in school was kind of turning me off. I was like, I don't know about whatever these guys are talking about, but I'm not sure what that is, and I'll stay open to it, but it wasn't really pulling me in. And then when I got to spend time at Numa with that community and with John Martinez, um, then it really started like clicking, and but and maybe even a little bit before that too with network because the philosophy is the same, it's the application and the art might be different, but it's all coming out of that same foundational those principles. And I think that my life had been moving along with those principles for some time, and then I got turned around, and then now it's like finding my way back to them. And so the more I learn them, the more I get to know them, the more I'm like, oh shoot, that is the rapport. That is the thing that's like drawing me in. And somehow the school experience is very different from that, and how the history of the school is gotten to where it is a whole other rabbit hole, but certainly it has something to do with Rockefeller medicine and the American Medical Association, and how chiropractic is basically just become a little branch off of that massive institution. And so there was definitely a turning back part. It felt like many times, like do I keep going forward? Because now I'm starting to see it for what it is, especially with COVID. COVID really revealed the schooling and what their foundation was, and I guess the business piece of it, and who they're beholden to. And that was a challenge, but I think at this point, it makes sense to finish it out for me, but had I known all of that ahead of going into it, I don't know if I would have. So, and I don't want to be that person to dissuade somebody else. Ultimately, it's they have to find out for themselves, just as I have, and certainly the universe placed everything in the perfect way for me to end up where I am right now, and I trust that. Um, and I think that my path might look a lot different from a lot of graduates from school. Like I could certainly see myself going in the direction of a mutual friend of ours where I let my license maybe lapse at some point and move myself into the private. Now that I understand more about these agreements that we make um, in the public with these corporations, like the United States of America, even, or the county of Alameda, or the board of chiropractic, and how we give up our rights for benefits and privileges. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes the benefits and privileges outweigh your rights in a certain situation, which is kind of strange, but it might be that way, you know? But to, I guess, to know that you have options and that you can stand on your rights uh, when you need to. And nobody has to give them to you. You just need to stand on them and proclaim them. And when you do that, things happen. And it's definitely a learning curve, and it's probably just as steep as learning chiropractic. But I feel like they're kind of, you know, they go hand in hand. They're natural law and natural health, you know, are one and the same. You know, they really feed into one another and support one another. And if you yeah, if you can stand on one, it'll help you stand on the other, or by virtue of the one, you can stand on the other. It's they're definitely interdependent with one another, and that has been my extracurricular sort of education during this interesting time with with chiropractic. My extracurricular has been this natural law piece, and learning about the agreements that I acquiesce to, that we all do unconsciously most of the time, but and certainly consciously we do it too. Um, and then as far as I don't know, I I guess I don't know. Do I chew up all my minutes there? Is that the end of it, or?
No, but I'm just making that because I have 2% battery left now, 1% battery left. That's me. It wasn't you. It was just my